StratOMatic almost went bankrupt in 1962. That seems insane to say when you take a look at how large StratOMatic is today. It also seems crazy when you realize just how influential Strat has been in the world of baseball sims. And the problem wasn't advertising, no, the problem was likely with the product itself, believe it or not. Well, back in 2011, StratOMatic reprinted what it called the Founders Edition, the very first version of the game. Now, this reprinting was limited to 1,000 copies, and most collectors have kept theirs sealed. That's because they're smarter than me. If you play the game, you'll see right away that there are a few issues. The most glaring issue, of course, is the complete lack of a fielding system. Well, that version feels like a game that just isn't complete. I mean, the pitching system was there, the basic concepts were there, but it doesn't feel like StratOMatic, and honestly, it's not really that much fun. The old game had things that will seem familiar to you, the 3 different ground ball and fly ball types, for example. As you probably know, these likely were inspired by Ethan Allen's AllStar Baseball, which had a similar system for outs. And we know that Richmond played AllStar Baseball when he was a kid. He was likely inspired by that game, even if he didn't fully realize it. When you look in the history of baseball sims, it's pretty interesting to see how one idea will be borrowed from another game and then passed on to another game and so on and so forth. It's like the old games end up turning into new games after people kind of mix things up. We all knew for a long time, at least, about APBA being based on national pastime, but it wasn't just J. Richard Seitz who was doing a lot of heavy borrowing. Richmond also made a mistake with the first edition of the game back in 1961. He only created partial team sets, 5 players from each team in the majors. The idea was to create some sort of all-star roster, which of course was also borrowed directly from AllStar Baseball. That's why the game was called AllStar Baseball. Richmond did something similar in 1962, though he did create a few teams with about 17 players each. And anyway, these incomplete teams were really unpopular with his customers. It's not that Richmond's customers hated the idea behind StratOMatic, it's that the game was really incomplete. There were already popular games on the market that came with playable rosters for every team in the major leagues, and those games also had fielding systems. Well, in 1963, Richmond decided to step up his game. It must have been a really tough financial decision for him, but he went for it. He printed 20-player rosters for each of the 20 major league teams at the time. And he also rolled out the StratOMatic fielding system, which is one of the most influential fielding systems anywhere in tabletop baseball. The most obvious improvement was to notate the fielder making the plays on the cards themselves. This was a lot better than just ground ball A or whatever. In the revised game, you could actually see which one of your fielders made the play. This is a really important point. You see, the magic of sports sims is the way they create an image in your mind. You need to be able to see what happens when you play. If things are too vague, the game feels like a chore. It's not really any fun. But the best part of the fielding system came on the pitcher's cards. That would be these X chances, which meant consulting the fielding chart. Hal gave every fielder a rating from 1 to 4, with 1 being the best and 4 being the worst. In the late 1990s, they expanded this from 4 to 5 possible ratings. Anyway, you'd find a random number, 1 from 20, and you would look at the chart for the result. Now, the cool part here is that the results are not restricted to outs and errors. A poor outfielder might give up a single, double, or even a triple. Good second basemen and shortstops will turn more double plays. And the huge variety of potential results mean that it's an adventure every time you consult the charts. I really think that this fielding system is evidence of Hal Richmond's genius. I mean, Hal didn't just sort of throw some kind of random fielding system out there. This had clearly been worked on for years, and it was actually a significant part of Strat's system. You see, this fielding system meant that StratOMatic was not just a 50-50 game. These days, the X chart comes up a little under 15% of the time. Now, I haven't yet done the analysis to see if that's true for the original 1962 season pitcher cards, though it's probably just about right. And remember that the X-chart lookups only happen on the pitcher's card. And of course, that means that you use the hitter's card 50% of the time, the pitcher's card about 35% of the time, and the fielder's rating about 15% of the time. Now, I'm not sure if those numbers are sound according to sabermetric principles, nor do I really care, to be honest. It works well because it adds depth to the board game. It's not just a game of pitcher versus hitter. It's a game that involves all of the players. That means that you have to pay attention to how good or how bad certain guys are in the field. A bad fielder will hurt you. But the real magic in the system comes from this baby, the 20-sided die. Now, in the old days, this was a split card deck, 20 different cards, each with its own number. So you were supposed to shuffle the cards and draw them at random. It must have been pretty tedious. I can't imagine playing Strat without this baby, this 20-sided die. It's just so easy and natural to use. But the best part about this mechanic is that it's fast. You get the result right away. Well, I should note that what I know about the history of this system comes entirely from Glenn Guzzo's excellent book Strat-O-Matic Fanatics. It seems that Richmond's original game was a modified form of the old dice baseball games that also inspired Clifford Van Beek. Richmond's modified game morphed into a card-heavy game by the mid-1950s, which used as many as 6 different decks of cards to get various results. And, according to Glenn Guzzo's description, almost half of those results directed the players to the various fielding card decks that Richmond had created. So it's interesting to note that Richmond decided to go commercial with his game in 1961, which was before he had really updated that fielding mechanism. That's why there's no fielding in the Founders Edition. It's also fascinating that those 3 different decks of cards were eventually replaced by this little die. In the 1961 version of Strat-O-Matic, the split deck, or the 20-sided die, only comes up on individual cards where the results are split. This is a fascinating mechanic, by the way. So when you place them together, you've got 66 potential outcomes between the batter and the pitcher cards. But of course, the probabilities aren't all that easy to spot at first glance since you're adding together 2 dice rolls. It's much more likely that you roll a 7 than a 2 or a 12, for example. Including the split ratings means that things are even more complex. So for example, if Walter Johnson rolls a 5 in column 6, he's got a 25% chance of giving up a home run, but that's 25% of the chance that he rolls exactly a 5 in precisely the 6th column. Well, if you start dissecting the game, it becomes obvious really quickly that the whole system was created by a guy who really loved math, but that's only part of the story. Your outfielder with a 1 rating is generally going to make the out unless he happens to make a serious 2-base error. You're more likely to see a good outfielder with a 2, however, in which case there are quite a few chances that he's going to give up base hits. And then you get to the strange stuff, the fact that the wild pitches and the passed balls are all on the catcher's X chart and they're all followed by a foul out. Now, this is a basic game, so you've got to expect that there's going to be some simplification and a bit of inaccuracy, but I've always considered this particular feature to be totally bizarre. I think that the foul out part is likely because Richmond wanted to avoid having players of the game roll the dice twice for the same plate appearance, but I've honestly got no idea why the wild pitches are on the catcher's sheet and not the pitcher's sheet. It's just one of those things. There's also the little fact that there are no hit-by-pitch results on any basic cards, pitchers or hitters, and that has been a long-standing tradition. So some people have speculated that Richmond might not have had hit-by-pitch statistics in 1963. I do not think that is true. I can see them just fine in this 1962 Sporting News Baseball Guide, for example. In 1962, there were 853 triples and 709 batters hit by pitches. Triples are a part of the game, but not the hit-by-pitch. And it's a problem. This one thing is probably the biggest problem with Strat-O-Matic's basic game. I've got no idea why Hal Richmond didn't think of including hit by pitch in the early days, and it seems that Strat decided not to change what it was doing in the basic game after 1963, with one exception, that was adding in the extra fielding ratings in 1997. So anyway, this is one of those things you've just got to accept or that you've got to modify on your own. The older Strat-O-Matic sets also allegedly suffer from a calculation error. Richmond's formula apparently calculated walks per at-bat, not per plate appearance, due to a mistake he made early on. This was fixed sometime in the early 1970s, I believe. There's also a person over on the Strat-O-Matic Gamer forum on Delphi who has been slowly deconstructing the original 1968 season to see how it was made. He seems to have discovered that Richmond probably didn't actually know how many doubles and triples pitchers gave up. Instead, Richmond likely used some sort of formula to estimate those numbers. Well, that does take a little bit away from the myth of Strat-O-Matic that has risen up over time. So there is this myth that was actually perpetuated in part by Glenn Guzzo that Hal Richmond was somehow granted exclusive access to these secret statistics that the Baseball Statistics Bureaus had kept hidden from the public in the 1960s. Now, there is some evidence that Richmond had access to accurate left and right-handed splits for the 1971 season that formed the backbone to the advanced game. But remember, the Sports Illustrated baseball game that came out before also had the same stats in the background. It also seems, from what I've heard, that Richmond lost that access afterwards. In other words, the 72 season through some point in time in the mid to late 70s didn't really have accurate lefty-righty splits. Richmond was able to regain that access around the time the rest of the sabermetrics community had it in the late 70s. In other words, there's a bit of embellishment and quite a bit of marketing that has clouded things up over the years, creating this myth. But honestly, that stuff doesn't really matter all that much to me. I care more about how the game plays than all the trivial stuff. Anyway, I decided to replay the 1924 World Series to reacquaint myself with the basic game. Well, I first bought a copy of Strat-O-Matic about 18 years ago or so. I might have played with the basic game once, but I spent more of my time with the super advanced game. Now, I know you're not supposed to do that. It says in the instructions to play the basic game first, but I couldn't help myself. I just really wanted to see what the more advanced form was like. Anyhow, in real life, the 1924 World Series was one of the closest of all time. My version wasn't quite that exciting. The New York Giants simply clobbered the Senators, scoring runs in bunches to win the series 4-2. The Giants scored 5 runs in one inning, 7 in another inning, and 8 in a third inning as they pushed on to victory. In the 6th game, the Giants took a 2-0 lead in the top of the 9th inning, where they exploded for 5 runs. Washington, meanwhile, had real trouble mustering any kind of offensive attack. The real highlight of the series came at the top of the 8th inning of the 5th game when Sam Rice came up for Washington with 2 men on and nobody out. Rice rolled into this line out into as many outs as possible result, which was a rare triple play. Well, that was both unexpected and a lot of fun. Now, I guess it wasn't an unassisted triple play, but it was still a triple play, a real rarity. And that's part of the joy of Strat-O-Matic, having the unexpected suddenly happen. Well, most Strat-O-Matic fans will tell you that they prefer the uncertainty and the lack of patterns on the cards, and it really does keep you on your toes. You never know whether a roll will be good or bad. I've rolled triple sixes multiple times, but only came up with routine outs on the pitcher cards. It's actually pretty compelling game design. It makes you feel like every single plate appearance is unique and that you have no idea what is coming next. Anyway, all in all, I really like the Strat-O-Matic Basic game. The basic game might be a little bit more overshadowed by the more complex Strat-O-Matic baseball games, but all in all, it still is a lot of fun to play. It flows really nicely, it's easy to pick up and learn, and it's the sort of game that you want to keep on playing. So if you haven't played it for a while, I say, hey, give it a whirl, see how you like it.